You're listening to the Deep Purple Podcast, a fan podcast about one of the most legendary bands of all time, Deep Purple. We take a look at the music, history, and people behind the band Deep Purple and beyond. Welcome to the Deep Purple Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Beaudry, and with me today I have my good friend and co-host, John Matola. How are you doing?
All right. Yo.
All right. If you want to keep up to date on the show, you can subscribe in Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcatcher. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Click the bell down below for notifications. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and our website is deeppurplepodcast.com. You can also contact us at info@deeppurplepodcast.com. And if you like what you hear and you want to hear more episodes, please become a patron on Patreon. Donate like $1 a month. That would be great. If all of our viewers donate $1 a month, we'll have about $1 a month. Then the best way to get people to figure out and hear about the show is to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. We've got 8 ratings so far, up from last week.
Woohoo!
So getting some good ratings, some good feedback. And I don't know how much you've been away for a little bit. So where you've been probably not on top of everything, but where were you for the long weekend?
I went to Los Angeles for the weekend.
Ah.
I went to catch up with one of my friends who I met last December at the New Jersey Kiss Expo. It's in Parsippany, which if you say that enough times, it sounds really silly. My friend Jerry, who I met, lives in LA in the hills, and he asked me to come out because this weekend, amongst other things, one of the things that was happening was the Ride for Ronnie, which is the
being Ronnie James Dio, right?
Ronnie James Dio, yeah, who's I've heard about this for a few years, but it was the 5th annual motorcycle ride and live concert, which all of the proceeds is going to cancer research. I would highly recommend. When we went out there, he really downplayed it. He's like, it's not going to be big. There aren't going to be a ton of people there. And he's just like, I don't want you to think it's some huge thing. It was in a park in Glendale. Encino, I think. And it wasn't that huge. You know, there was like good number of people there. I would say maybe a couple of hundred in this park. It was kind of small, but it was really cool. I like stuff like that because it's really intimate. I'm like, you didn't downplay it at all. This is awesome. But yeah, it was a great time. It was a nice day. There were a lot of cool bands out doing the show. So it was hosted by Eddie Trunk, who was from That Metal Show. Mm-hmm. And some of the bands that played was the Bullet Boys, who Mark Torian is the only original member, but I think we walked in like almost at the end of their set, but I was surprised at how good they were. Yeah. He still got pipes, and we made it just in time for Smooth Up Enya, which was awesome. But no, they were really, really good. There was another band called Petty Cash, which was a cover band who only does Tom Petty and Johnny Cash songs, which was pretty interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Petty.
Petty Cash. And they had some all-star players up there, which included Dave Grohl. Came up at the end. He played drums on a couple of songs. One of them was a Motorhead song.
He's a big Dio fan, so I'm not surprised.
Oh yeah, totally. And I guess he lives in the neighborhood too. So, and they were like joking around with them. They're just like, hey, he came from 2 blocks away. You know, like it's no big deal. I mean, we're from the East Coast, so I'm not used to that stuff. But I'm trying to zoom in here on just a few of the other people. Simon Wright from Dio's band. Scott Warren, who was also in Dio's band, was playing. The one that I texted you about, I can't remember all the other players on it, but Neil Turbin the original vocalist of Anthrax, sang as part of an all-star band, Highway Star, which I texted you the end of that. It was pretty impressive. I can't remember who the guitar player was, but he did a pretty decent job too with Ritchie's solos. It was pretty good. Yeah. And some of these, some of the other people on here, I can't remember, but there's a lot of people. My friend is pretty well connected out there because he lives out there. So it was like just introducing me to all sorts of people and band members and stuff. And so it was a really cool event. I would recommend to anybody that is in the area to go see it. And they had a silent auction, a lot of cool merch to purchase. And again, everything goes to cancer research. R.I.P. Ronnie. So, but that was really cool. Amongst other things, I won't, keep you too long with that. But we definitely hit some spots, including the Rainbow Bar and Grill on the Sunset Strip, which was every bit as awesome as I hoped it would be. We went twice.
Oh, cool.
We caught some local bands at the Whiskey A Go Go, which was pretty cool also. The Sunset Strip is not nearly what, as a whole, what you think it would be after, maybe watching the Motley Crue Dirt movie. But
that's all I think of is the Motley Crue. I think of that Motley Crue documentary from the 80s where like I think they're like in a hot tub in the back of a limo or something.
Yep.
Is that it's kind of, I just imagine it's like that all the time.
Yeah, it was probably like that 30 years ago. Not anymore. It's like it's kind of one of the dullest places that you could go to on a Saturday night because it's all contained. It's just like any other kind of street or like strip in like a big city is like it's kind of everything's contained within like the buildings or the venues. It's not like the whole place isn't like decadence.
Yeah.
Like it probably was in the 80s, but nonetheless still really cool. Got to see Lemmy's Lounge, tribute to Lemmy when we went in the Rainbow. They got a big bronze statue of him and everything. I met Ron Jeremy, which I was not expecting.
No, I guess it's not surprising he'd be hanging out in those circles.
Yeah, but yeah, so that's the one big name I could drop.
After all that's where you bumped shoulders with.
Yeah, but yeah, it was a really great time, and it was kind of like the ride for Ronnie was kind of like the catalyst for the whole trip. He's like, hey, while you're out here, like this is happening, you should come. And then that was kind of like the event that we centered the trip around. But I got to do a lot of cool stuff and check out a lot of cool music, and maybe some of that will segue into our later discussion for why we're really here. But anyway, that's enough of a sidebar about that.
Cool. Well, I actually happened to, on Twitter, I started following the Ronnie Dio Cancer Society or whatever it's called. I apologize.
The Stand Up and Shout.
And I saw some tweets they were doing and pictures of the show, not really realizing that that's where you were. And when you sent me that video, I was like, that looks really familiar. And then I kind of pieced together. I was like, oh, this is where he is. And some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
So, so our second episode was released yesterday. So we're keeping about a week ahead of this. So last week when we recorded, it had been released that morning. We're a day behind because you were on your trip. And so we've got quite a bit of feedback. I'm actually surprised at how much feedback we got. And I don't know how much of it you saw, but
I don't think I've seen any of the new feedback. Do you have any of it available?
I do. So Ian Des 76 on Twitter says, nice discussion, guys. Keep the pods coming. And then also says, still can't wrap my head around Stormbringer and CTTB, meaning Come Taste the Band. So somebody that's kind of with the main line of thinking of that Stormbringer and Come Taste the Band are a little too far out there. So hopefully we can change his or her mind when we get to those episodes, which I'm very much looking forward to. Joe Black Rock on Twitter says Deep Purple podcast. Who knew? So that my suspicions are confirmed that no one knows about the Deep Purple podcast, and there aren't any other ones out there. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing that he wrote that, but at least it shows that there aren't any other ones out there still that we can detect.
Mm-hmm.
So we got a few other things. So Sabbath Bloody PC, who is a guy who does a Black Sabbath podcast called Sabbath Bloody Podcast. And it's awesome. I've listened to probably like in the past week since he tweeted me, I've listened to about like 7 or 8 episodes.
Wow.
And very interesting. Does like deep dives on all the albums. I skipped around. I listened to the first few episodes in order, and then I saw his most recent episode is about 7 Star. So I had to jump ahead and listen to that one. Even though I don't know that album at all, just only that Glenn Hughes was the singer on that album. So I listened to that, and that really makes me want to listen to the album and sort of not want to listen to the album at the same time.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, I
like it.
He's very critical of all the albums, which is really good. And on that one, he was kind of, I don't think he's the biggest Glenn Hughes fan, but he was kind of talking about how what the original concept for the album was and all that. So it's really interesting. Really good podcast. If you're into Black Sabbath, I'd highly recommend. But anyway, Sabbath Bloody Podcast said, my prayers have been answered. Excited to go deep with this. Welcome to the community. So welcoming us, which is really cool.
Awesome.
To learn more about Deep Purple. And then he said later on he was thinking about maybe doing a Deep Purple podcast at some point in the future, because eventually he's going to run out of Black Sabbath material.
Yeah.
Then we got a comment on the website. Good to see. It says, good to see someone has started a Deep Purple podcast. The first show was a good start. A few tech glitches, but mostly good, honest conversation about the greatest hard rock band of all time. Congrats, Nathan and John. I look forward to hearing what you have up your sleeves for next time. So very nice.
Awesome.
We had another one, which was, I forgot I had some of these kind of available to show as screenshots, and then I didn't do that. So, oh well. But another one we have here is a user shared the Grizzly Adams nodding guy, just nodding Grizzly Adams,
Yeah.
just approving of the podcast. So I thought that was maybe the highest praise that we've gotten.
Oh, that's cool.
I think mostly just approving of the fact that there is a Deep Purple podcast, more so than the job we did on it.
That it exists, yeah.
And then we had a few other little odds and ends comments and some back and forth conversation, but considering the very, very low number of Twitter followers, we got a lot of feedback, I thought, for the first, we're only about 7 days into this. So pretty good to see that we got all of that. We've got, all of these comments came before episode 2 was even released, and we've got listeners now from the US, Ireland, Canada, Chile, Brazil, the Philippines, Uruguay, Spain, Denmark, Norway, Poland, Estonia, and Serbia.
Wow.
I know, right? So, Denmark and Norway kind of representing that Scandinavian metal following, I'm sure. But we got people kind of all over Europe, South America. Very, very cool stuff. So
pretty awesome.
Yeah. So pretty good reception, I'd say, for how early on we are into this weird project that we decided to start. So this week we're starting at the beginning. Last week we talked about the backstory. What were these guys doing before they formed Deep Purple? We didn't get too much into how the band formed, but this week want to kind of talk a little bit about the history and then dive into the first album, Shades of Deep Purple, which is not either of our favorite albums by a long shot. But
no, it is not.
But there's a lot of very interesting backstory. So in 1967, Chris Curtis, who was a drummer for the Searchers, he met with a local businessman And I think we talked about this a little bit last week about forming this band called Roundabout, where they'd have a rotating cast of characters. They'd get on and get off like a roundabout. And Chris Curtis would be the only mainstay. He'd stay on as the singer. Well, as you know, that he never even got, I don't even know how far that went, or if there was even any like jamming with him as a singer, but that never really got off the ground. Chris's roommate happened to be John Lord. John Lord was his roommate when he was playing with the Artwoods. And Artwood, which I didn't talk about last time, was the brother of Ronnie Wood from the Rolling Stones, which I didn't know that there was a connection there.
Oh, well, that makes sense if you think about it.
Yeah, it totally does, and
yeah,
keeps with the trend of all of these bands intertwining.
Yeah.
So John was also playing in some other outfit called The Garden, which was the backing band for the Flower Pot Men. So you had the Flower Pot Men in the front, and then the Garden in the back, which you never even saw was the players or the band members. So weird kind of Flower Pot Men, the Garden, weird kind of going on there. I don't really get it.
A gardening theme going on there.
Yes, it was, it was a different time. So they recommended Ritchie Blackmore. Curtis had been aware of him when he was in the Searchers, and I think they played together in Germany when Ritchie was in the Outlaws, which we saw one of their videos last week. Then Ritchie ended up joining Roundabout in 1967. Chris Curtis apparently had all sorts of weird quirks and all these different weird things that went on, potentially being involved with like psychedelic drugs and things like that, and quickly just was kind of removed from this whole project, and they just decided to kind of move along and go in a different direction because he was getting to be unreliable. So John Lord was able to get Nick Simper to join, having played with him in the Flower Pot Men, and a drummer named Bobby Woodman. And Bobby Woodman is a jazz kind of drummer. At least I think he's still active even. He's been playing for a really long time. Woodman didn't stay around very long. He kind of he said something about, I think there's a quote in one of the books I was reading about how he's called all this effing circus music and kind of walked out. So he wasn't digging the noodling and stuff that probably John and Ritchie were up to at the time. Nick Simper apparently had contacted Ian Gillan to audition for a singer. Ian Gillan declined because he was already in an established band who was touring all over the place, episode 6, and decided to kind of hang with them, kind of hitch to that wagon. So this group that they had, without a singer, ended up renting this farmhouse in February of 1968, and they set up shop, and they decided they're going to search for a singer. So one of the first people they considered was Rod Stewart, who at the time was singing for Jeff Beck. So I want to read to you, this is from a book called Deep Purple, A Matter of Fact by Jerry Bloom. And Jerry Bloom has written, as far as I can tell, like a dozen books on Deep Purple. He seems to be the leading authority. That documentary I'd sent you a while back, he was featured in that. He's very much the kind of expert. So he wrote this about the whole Rod Stewart thing, which I thought would be interesting to share. I'm not a huge Rod Stewart fan. I can't even imagine what Deep Purple would sound like with Rod Stewart, but here is a direct quote from Jerry Bloom's book. Another vocalist considered was the lead singer with the Jeff Beck group, Rod Stewart. The guys went to check him out at London's Marquee Club on the 20th of February, 1968. Blackmore was, and indeed still is to this day, a great admirer of Beck's guitar skills, but none of the band was suitably impressed with Stewart to even offer him an audition. It's probably worth mentioning that Stewart had also been one of the many vocalists to enter Joe Meek's studios several years earlier, but the Maverick producer was also unimpressed with the self-proclaimed Scottish singer. And he has Scottish in quotes, so I don't know if there's a story behind that. Maybe Rod Stewart says he's Scottish, but he isn't. I don't know. But when we start our Rod Stewart podcast, we can dive into that. But yeah. I don't really care. So then there's one other story from the book that's really interesting. And this is another direct quote from Jerry Bloom's book. Another interesting fact concerning Stewart happened shortly after this. Simper recalled it was during Deep Purple's tour in Denmark, but it possibly occurred at the 8th National Jazz and Blues Festival at Sunbury-on-Thames on 8th of August, where both bands were on the bill. According to Simper, Blackmore was chatting with Stewart and recalling the night that the Marquis earlier in the year drew the singer in hook, line, and sinker when he commented, "It was really great." Stewart apparently perked up. Yeah? Especially the bit when you went off stage for the band to do an instrumental. So he said that that's what Blackmore said, and then Stewart was looking pretty dejected after that. So I don't have any trouble believing Ritchie Blackmore would do that.
Yeah, I was like, you wouldn't have any problem believing that Blackmore's a dick. Like, I feel like, yeah, okay, thanks a lot, Ritchie.
Yeah, I gotta say, of all the current and past members of Deep Purple, I think he'd be the one I'd be the most scared to actually meet. I feel like he's somebody that could just like make you feel like crap with 2 words, and you just and my whole life is worthless. You know, he's just, you know, just having seen interviews with him and interviews, there's a few like you start, you know, watching a few documentaries or whatever on YouTube, and then they start recommending anything having to do with Ritchie Blackmore. So I get all these things that pop up all the time. Like, here's what Ronnie James Dio says about Ritchie Blackmore, and here's what this person says about him. And everyone pretty much says the same thing. He's an amazing guitar player, but they all have he's not maybe the nicest guy to be in a band with.
Yeah.
So after this, they eventually chose Rod Evans. Evans brought along Ian Paice, who replaced Woodman. And Woodman, like I said, was upset with the circus music. He went his own way. And then we had the first lineup, and the lineup that was ready for to record the album we're going to talk about in a little bit. So when they're getting ready to do this album, Blackmore asked his friend Derek Lawrence, who had produced The Outlaws, to be the band's producer. So the band recorded demos, they sent them to record labels, and they went on a promotional tour, played shows in Denmark and Sweden in April and May of 1968. They were booked as Roundabout, but on the ferry ride over to their first show, which was on April 20th, 1968, they decided that they were going to change their name to Deep Purple. And the reasoning behind this was apparently because Ritchie Blackmore, John Lord in an interview says, "Oh, I was afraid I've been on so many roundabouts, I never thought maybe it's trademarked, so we can't name ourselves a roundabout," which seems insane to me. I mean, it's a traffic pattern, or, you know, it's like stoplight or something. Like, why would roundabout be copyrighted? But Ritchie Blackmore says he wants to name it after Deep Purple because his grandmother's favorite song was called Deep Purple, and when she found out he was in a band, he asked, "Oh, do you sing my favorite song, Deep Purple?" I thought that was a little odd, but I have the actual song Deep Purple he's talking about. I want to play that for you just as a piece of history.
Interesting.
It was written by, who is it written by? So the song is called Deep Purple. It was written by, I want to say it's like Peter DeRose or something. I don't have it right here in front of me. But this is a recording, a very, very old recording of the song Deep Purple. Do you hear that?
Yeah.
So it was written in 1939. At least this recording is from 1939. It might be even older than that. The interesting thing about it is it goes really, really long before the vocals come in. Seems unusual for a 3-minute song. I can skip ahead to here we go. So you're listening to Ritchie Blackmore's grandmother's favorite song. A little bit of a little bit different than what you hear from Deep Purple.
Yeah, it sounds like every other 30 song that I've ever heard.
Exactly. It's not too crazy. So this is their first show in Denmark
Wow.
at a kind of anonymous looking, uh, looked like a banquet hall or something. Actually,
Yeah.
probably pretty modern for the time with that lighting and the drop ceiling up there, or the ceiling up there. You could see Rod Evans on stage with his striped pants on. Nick Simper right beside him. Yeah, it's got to be Nick beside him, and then Ritchie kind of tucked behind those speakers.
Where the hell is John Lord?
You can see his shoulder right by Nick Simper, and then
Like can he even fit on that stage?
yeah, it's a kind of
My
small
God.
stage, and everyone's kind of standing there in coats, like they're like like they just got there or they're ready to leave or something. But Rod Evans looks like he's given a pretty good performance, and can't see really Ian. You can see his drums, but you can't really see him. I don't know if that's his hair. That might be his hair right above
Yeah.
that symbol there. But
Hmm.
yeah, that's apparently it was cool that this picture actually exists of their first ever show.
Yeah, I didn't even know that there was any.
And they were billed as Roundabout at this point, but they had decided earlier this day that they were going to be called Deep Purple. So kind of cool.
Yeah.
So a little more backstory. There's a lot of kind of stuff that leads into this first album. So according to this book, the whole Deep Purple thing is there appears there may have been as many as 4 other bands called Deep Purple at this time, or right around this time. He shows some concert posters from bands from 1967. One playing a place called the Floral Hole, another place that, and all of them seem to kind of say the same thing, that they took their name from this song. There's also several gigs being played elsewhere in England by a band called Deep Purple, which can't be attributed to this place, the Floral Hall, or the Deep Purple that we know. And then finally, there was one who was billed with Episode 6, actually. They played a show, apparently, with Episode 6 at a place called The Cobweb. So Deep Purple and Episode 6 played together, but it wasn't actually the Deep Purple.
Yeah.
So they were signed when they got back from this short little stint in April and May. They were signed to a label called, I believe it's called Tetragrammaton is the name of it, which was a US label. And I guess that those kind of rich financiers were happy because they'd spent all this money on promotion and equipment, and now they were signed, so they knew that they were going to get some money back. So they booked the studio from May 11th through May 13th to record this album. So 11th, 12th, 13th, 3 days, 72 hours,
Wow.
including sleeping and all that, to record this album. So when, we say that this is maybe not our favorite album in the world, part of it might have to do with the fact that it was recorded in 3 days. And with that, I think we're going to go jump right into it. Kind of let me pull up these tracks here.
That is probably the most history that I've heard about this album ever, because you don't hear a lot about stuff about early Deep Purple or Deep Purple at this point. So these first 3 albums, it's almost like it's a mystery what's surrounding them before in rock, because you hear all the stories about the classic Mark II lineup. And then prior to that, it's like, oh yeah, and then those 360s albums.
Right.
And you don't know anything else. I mean, it's not widely written about or discussed, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I wonder how much of it has to do with the fact that we grew up in the United States. Like before I met you, like we talked about before, I had no idea that this Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale era existed at all. And I only kind of had whispers of this early 60s stuff too. So it was kind of frozen, and at least in American radio, to me, it seemed like it was just frozen in that, in rock Machine Head. And probably that's it. I mean, I can't think of, well, maybe who do we think we are a little bit, but it was just the Ian Gillan stuff. You never heard about any of this other stuff. And I wonder if in Europe or in other countries, it might've been a little bit more popular.
Yeah, that's true. the same has happened, I'm sure, for many other albums that I can't really think of at this point, but they're really, really huge in Europe or not in America. But and then certain albums like Broken America, and then all those were popular. Or for some instances, it would be like a whole band just would never really take off over here, or maybe like one song.
Yeah, there's a lot of bands you find like that you think are kind of dead, and
Yeah.
then you're like, oh my god, they're still huge in Japan, you know, like
Yeah.
and that was kind of true with Deep Purple too. Deep Purple was huge, and later on, Ian Gillan band, which got no success in the United States, was huge in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and they released a lot of live material. The Mark IV lineup of Deep Purple and Ian Gillan band, all those released a lot of material from Japan, like a live stuff. So anyway, the Shades of Deep Purple starts with this track called "And the Address." So it starts off kind of slow, and they mention in my readings that they had kind of, in order to fill this out, used like a lot of like BBC library sound effects and things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I noticed halfway through listening to it is just like there's a lot of like just like for lack of a better way of saying it, is just a lot of bullshit in the beginning of these songs.
Yep.
It's like traffic sound effects and rain sound effects, and I'm just like, what's all this? It's just
it's a lot of, you know, for a like
a lot of fluff.
song album, a lot of filler. You know, they take a good first minute of the 30 something minutes of this just to get. It sounds like John's just warming his organ up. But having listened to this a little bit recently, kind of digging this first song once it gets started, and the address. So the way it starts off kind of almost sounds like it's there's no lyrics to this song, but the middle part almost sounds like it's inspired by their cover of Hush when they finally kind of get into it. But this does sound like a Deep Purple groove right here. And then right here, kind of almost like it's the chorus of Hush.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, you hear that early Ritchie Blackmore sort of noodling.
Yeah, there wasn't really anything too. I mean, it's like it's got a good groove to it, but kind of melodic and restrained for Ritchie, because he doesn't really do anything too crazy in this song.
But Ian Paice is still just going crazy. He's not leaving any fill left unturned. When I think of these like early kind of albums by early bands, I feel like with some bands they kind of work themselves up to a point where they have so much live material, they've been playing live for so long that their first album is super, super strong. And then their second album is weak because they have to rush an album out and they don't really know how to, you know, they've been touring or playing the same songs and they don't have all the material. But I feel like with this album, and probably the first two albums, it's all kind of filler because at this point the band had only been together for a matter of months. And here they are in the studio trying to just put together enough material to make an album.
Yeah, I mean, they also did, what did they do, like 2 or 3 covers on this too?
Yeah, so the Hush is a cover, Help is a cover, and Hey Joe. So yeah, 3 out of the 8 songs are covers. And then you've got here an instrumental. So they're really kind of, it's like they're getting together for the first time and just jamming, and that's kind of what you're hearing is like, hey, let's try to figure out what our sound is.
And yeah, I think that's another thing too is just like a lot of these songs are really extended jams, like the sound effects at the beginning, and like almost kind of like excuse me. There's almost kind of like a lot of like noodling around, and like there's nothing really memorable about the songs, like in the later songs, that you could like hum along with them, and it sticks in your brain. And I think that's because, like you said, the songs probably weren't that well developed.
Right.
But I mean, that's not to say that there aren't some good bits.
Yeah, there's a lot of good ones. I think that's a real rockin' song once you get through the, you know, I am a big fan. I like filler on albums, you know, like I like hearing those kind of like little interludes and like little things like that. I love hearing that. I probably could have done without the big long organ lead up, because it's a little bit, but once they start rocking, you do get a sense of what they're about.
Yeah.
And the next song is obviously the song that, if anyone knows anything from the Mark I lineup, it's this song, and that's Hush, which is the second song on the album. Again, starting.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty classic rock radio staple.
So yeah, it's a good song. I don't, you know, it's not much probably to say about it that hasn't already been said in the past, but it's a good song. They do a great job with it. It sounds like the early Deep Purple style. Having those kind of backing vocals there are a little different. Because I think John Lord was singing backing vocals on that, which you don't even really think of him.
Oh wow, no.
Doing that. So yeah, I mean, it's a good song. I mean, everyone's probably heard it 1,000 times. Apparently, when the album was approved by the label, they did a photo shoot, and this was the photo that they went with for the UK cover. And you might be able to see the US cover behind me.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, they added all those other little squares in there. I don't know why they needed to have a different cover. This was designed by Les Weisbrick, and according to the book, so there's another book I was reading called Smoke on the Water, the Deep Purple story by Dave Thompson, and according to that book, the photo shoot for this album cost $500,000.
What?
I don't get it. I don't understand how that is even possible.
I could have done this with my iPhone.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe back then it was probably more expensive, but I have $500,000 expensive. That baffles me.
Well, you know, we used film cameras when we were younger. I don't remember film being that expensive, but
yeah.
Maybe it's the frills on that shirt that John's wearing. I don't know. I don't know what possibly could have added up to that much money.
Richie's bouffant, maybe the hairspray for his.
I don't know if I read that wrong or what it was, but
maybe £500,000.
That's more.
Oh, okay, forget it then.
I mean, I don't know what the 60s conversion rate was, but now it would be more. It doesn't seem. I'll have to look into that. Hopefully, we've got so many viewers now that somebody will be angry at me for getting that wrong and write in and
correct. Yeah, correct you.
My prayers and hopes are that I'll get lots of corrections on all the things that I'm bound to get wrong.
Well, yeah, then we're going to learn a lot more that way.
Right, because we are just, we're just a couple of fans. We're definitely not experts or historians.
Right.
So I guess they released this song in June of 1968. It was a huge success. It got up to number 4 on the U.S. charts. It didn't do as well in the UK. And one of the things we're going to see, at least for the first 2 albums, I'm not quite sure on the third one yet, is they were way more. Deep Purple had a lot more popularity in the United States than in the UK. They were kind of the reverse Beatles. They just could not get a foothold into the UK at first.
Huh.
So apparently they went on a song called The David Frost Show, a show called The David Frost Show, and filmed a segment for this. I looked everywhere for it. I couldn't find a film segment. So if you have one, please send it in. I'd love to see it. but for some reason Ritchie Blackmore wasn't available, so they had one of their roadies, Mick Angus, just stand in for him and just kind of pretend. They lip synced and he pretended to play the guitar, and they did this on the show. And they're like, nobody knows who the hell we are. Nobody will know that it's somebody else doing this.
Yeah, so who cares, right?
Exactly. So, like I said, the band focused on the U.S. That was kind of their goal, was to focus on the U.S. market and to really get in there. And it kind of snowballed because the UK just wasn't into it for whatever reason. And they continued to just kind of get more traction in the US and kind of not as much in the UK. So the next song is a definite change in style as far as I'm concerned. It's called One More Rainy Day. And this is kind of, again, starts with sound effects from the BBC library. I'm sure they're still available if you want them. I don't know why they felt the need to kind of take up the first 30 seconds or 45 seconds of every song with sound effects. Like another one of them starts with like traffic noises or something.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the most annoying things about this album is that there's a lot of that nonsense, like at the beginning of these songs. Like, I mean, it could have been done for time, or maybe they thought that, I mean, you know how it is being in the studio. You're like, hey, look at this cool sound effects CD or something. Let's put it at the beginning of everything. Or
yeah,
because we've certainly done that in the past.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you get a new toy and you want to mess around with it. And now with kind of unlimited ability to do almost anything very extremely cheaply.
Yeah.
You have, it's a little easier to have restraint because the toys are not as or they're easier to resist.
But it could have been it also could have been like a lot of this too could have been a sign of the times too. Like maybe, I don't know, maybe there were other bands like around the time experimenting with that. I mean, I can't think of any off the top of my head, at least that were big, that did that kind of thing. But to me, that's just one of the things that made this album kind of boring, was it's just like they didn't just get right to it.
Right.
And I don't know how much you want me to reserve my overall comments for the album overall to the end, or if we just want to talk about it going through.
I think we could probably, I mean, whatever you want, I guess.
Well, one of the things that I noticed, like halfway through this too, is I think the songs really drag because it's like Rod Evans is a good vocalist, but I mean, when I texted you this afternoon, I said I can see why they made a lineup change.
Yeah.
It's just like, at least in this album, it's just like he's just really, his voice just really drags. He's really like low energy, like the total opposite of Ian Gillan. He's just a one more rainy day, or it's like hush, hush. It's like he doesn't have any dynamics or anything. He just sounds really like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I find this song to me is.
But even on the more energetic songs, though, he sounds like he's just kind of plodding along. You know, he sounds kind of like almost bored.
Yeah, I wonder what he's a ba 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 ba. I wonder.
Sure.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I wonder what the time constraints in the studio played into that too. You know, how comfortable.
Well, yeah.
How much time had he spent in a recording studio? You know, we knew he did a few things, but.
Well, yeah. I mean, if there's any like maybe live recordings that could prove us, because I mean, we heard the stuff from what was the other band that him and Ian Paice played in, where we thought that song was really good.
Yeah, they had some good stuff.
But I mean, his voice sounded really good in that, and I mean, this one is like you said, it could have been because they recorded the album in 3 days. They didn't know the material that well, but it's just like, I feel like on the first few albums, his voice just kind of like, he's just not a dynamic singer on this.
No. And that's a very, kind of laid back, very 60s pop song. I almost wonder if.
Yeah, laid back. Yeah, too laid back, I think.
I wonder if they were kind of going with that as their radio, or trying to go for that as their radio single.
Maybe.
As opposed to Hush. You know, like I feel like that was definitely more One More Rainy Day is more kind of like what you'd expect to hear on the radio at that time. You know, Hush had already had some popularity, I guess, from other artists. I don't know how many other artists had already recorded it, but yeah, I mean, I wonder. One More Rainy Day. I feel like the next song here is one of those which they always do in these early albums. It's like 2 songs on one track, but they're considered the same. I don't know why they always do that or did that. You know, like the Black Sabbath album was like 5 songs, but it's like some of the tracks have 3 songs in them, you know?
Yeah.
But this, this next one it starts with a prelude called Happiness, which it morphs into a cover. So I was actually wrong. There's 4 covers on this.
Oh.
Count this one as 2 tracks. There's actually 9 tracks. So 4 out of the 9 are covers. And that the I'm So Glad is written by Skip James.
Right.
And then the Happiness is written by Blackmore, Evans, Lord, Paice, and Simper. So all of them got in on that one. And I wonder if what I was thinking is if you put all 3 of the first Deep Purple albums, if you gave them like a more appropriate amount of time to record this and said, you know, let's just take the greatest parts of all 3 of these albums, I bet you could put together a really good album. If you had time to better arrange the songs and better record them and kind of cull through some of the filler, I bet you could have a really solid first album. And
I'm sure, yeah.
The amount of time between the first album and the third album, I think, is about a year.
Yeah.
They recorded all 3 of these like within a year, which is a blistering pace, especially for a brand new band.
Oh yeah. I mean, I would have to say that just jumping ahead, the third album is probably out of these first 3 is my favorite. Just because I think that, you know, maybe at that point, even though it was a year later, they finally kind of found a groove. I think this one, when I was listening to it earlier, if I'm not wrong, I think that there was like some parts in Happiness that I thought were actually pretty good. And if I think it might have been like the only thing that I like about the playing on this album is John Lord is always consistently really good. I think he really like burst out some kind of like blistering parts in this, if I remember right.
Well, let's take a listen. So again, starting with kind of like a synth start to it. So there's a book by Mick Farron, which described Deep Purple's music as a slow and pompous din somewhere between Bad Tchaikovsky and a B-52 taking off on a bombing run.
Oh my God.
Not a fan of this first album.
Well, I mean, I feel like Deep Purple was also trying to be, or maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like maybe they didn't fit in because, I mean, this is really like odd to me for like late 60s rock music, just because they were playing in all like it was kind of had a classical feel to it, and it's just all of them together. It's like playing like this. Like, I mean, what other early 60s stuff like this with these production values and that kind of vocalist and everything sounds like this, write songs like this?
Right. Yeah, you get a lot of that. You can hear kind of what was going on in John Lord's head. This song even reminds you of some of the things you might hear in the concerto.
Yeah, very operatic, and this part here is really good. This is it.
Yeah, very, very, very concerto sounding.
Yeah, really good. Really, song's very dynamic. I like it.
Makes you glad that they saw the potential, that the record label saw the potential in them.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded like they put a little too much pressure on them to release albums so rapidly, but the end result is some pretty good stuff. That's right. I mean, this is a composition more so than a song.
Yeah.
So this is where it kind of breaks down into this. I think Evans starts up soon, right?
Yeah. And I think another thing about this album too is that there's a lot of yeah, you go from stuff like that, which is just really like just takes you on this journey to like it's just very what was the word, laid back you used?
Yeah.
I think it's just too laid back for me.
I gotta say, I don't want to be negative, but I really don't like this "I'm so glad" part, because it just, I'm so glad, he must say I'm so glad 100 times. It just keeps, I'm so glad, I'm so glad, I'm so glad. Like, this part to me is really tedious. Like, I like that instrumental build up to this. I feel like this instrumental build up should build up to this. It's almost like Child of Time, how it has that really slow dynamic build up, and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, louder, turns into this just absolute chaos, and then slows down again. Well, this one has this big build up, and then just turns into I'm so glad, I'm so glad, I'm glad, again and again and again. It just keeps popping back up, and it seems like there's nothing there. Like they could have left that part out.
And I mean, my intention too isn't to like shit all over this album. I mean, it's just like
no, I mean, given the time, given what they had to work with, given their budget, given all of that.
But I feel like
it's a miracle they were able to get anything recorded. I mean, this is and this is the foundation and the starting point of one of our, two of our favorite band, basically, I don't know that Deep Purple is my favorite band, but I think everything that they created and everything that came out of Deep Purple is amongst all of my favorite stuff, So I'm so glad. It keeps it goes and goes.
We don't have to listen to the rest of this.
That one's that one definitely is again got some really
I'm so glad it's over.
So then we go into Mandrake Root, which is one song that always seems to come up whenever they're talking about like old Deep Purple, is Mandrake Root. Again, starting with some sound effects of like insects or something. This is real, early Deep Purple groove here.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good song. And this is one of those ones they were kept on playing into Gillan and Glover's tenure as well.
Mm-hmm.
So every interview I've seen with Ritchie Blackmore, he raves about Vanilla Fudge. He loved Vanilla Fudge. And the band at this point in the UK anyway was getting criticized for being too American. Rod Evans got some good energy in this one.
Yeah, I was gonna say he sounds like a little bit more into this one. I always kind of like the pulsating like dun 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 dun. That's like you said, classic Deep Purple.
It's like Foxy Lady.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Ritchie, dun dun dun. Ritchie Blackmore makes no bones about talking about how he just wanted to be Hendrix. Like he talks about Hendrix. Like if you see interviews with him from last year, he'll just be still talking about Hendrix. Which for obvious reasons, but the Hendrix and Vanilla Fudge. And, so in the US, they kind of introduced them sometimes at shows as the English Vanilla Fudge to kind of get people accustomed to what they'd be hearing. And the critics called them the poor man's Vanilla Fudge. I am not very familiar with Vanilla Fudge. I did look up a couple of their things on YouTube to get a little more acquainted, because I really just don't know much about Vanilla Fudge, but I don't know that I really hear it, but it's interesting. Well, Mandrake Root's a pretty good song.
Yeah, I like it.
It might be the standout on this album, because And the Address is a good jam, but it's all instrumental, so this might be my favorite on the album.
Yeah, I could say that I can see the potential in this song past like the production and like the tempo. I think the tempo of the overall album is too slow. Like even that song too, it's just like that was the most energetic that you heard Rod Evans, but even like the tempo is like, you know, na, 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 na. It's like when it goes into that, it's like you feel like, yeah, that could have like the pace could have been picked up a lot. And that could have had, go ahead.
I'd be willing to bet when they played this with Gillan and Glover, they sped it up.
And I mean, I feel like that has a lot to do with the producer as well, because one of the things that I know about, to jump ahead a few years to the first Kiss album, is when they did their demos for that album with Eddie Kramer, they were really high energy, like fast paced. If you hear any live versions of their stuff, like their early shows, but then on the album, they told them like to slow down the tempo and to play very like measured and almost like contrived and everything. So the versions that you hear on the album sounds almost like really kind of muted and everything, which is why a lot of bands, they say, oh, you don't really hear how great the song is until you see us live or whatever. So it's like a lot of that could have been the producer as well.
It's almost like when you do a report in high school and you don't have enough material for it, so you double space it and then you tighten the margins up a little bit and you make the font a little bit bigger. It's almost like they knew they didn't have enough material for an album, so like, just put in a minute of traffic sound effects before that song and let's slow the tempo down. Instead of 120 BPM, let's do 100 BPM on this song. You know, like I don't know if that's what was going on at the time, but like, you know, this whole album I think is like 37 minutes, which is pretty short.
Yeah,
I guess at the time, probably for an album that was maybe average, but
that's what it feels like. Yeah,
like, we got to fill up both sides of these records, boys. Let's put on the sound effects and slow this tempo down, and you know, maybe put a little bit more space in between the songs or whatever it is. You know, like it's almost like they just didn't have enough. You know.
Yeah, but in terms of like songwriting, like the original songs, like that's one that I could hear them doing live or somebody covering it and it, you know, sounding really good.
Yeah,
like really heavy.
So from Mandrake Root, they go into Help, which is the classic Beatles cover that they do. Again, starting off with futuristic synth sounds here. And you know, again, here's a song that by the Beatles is probably 2 minutes and 45 seconds. They stretch it into 6 minutes.
I actually like this version of the song, and I like, kind of has almost that Child in Time vibe to it.
Yeah, and I think I talked about this maybe on one of our 2 previous episodes. It just feels almost like they could have just made this their own song. You know what I mean? It has so little in common with Help other than the lyrics. I mean, you can notice the chord progressions a little bit, but with a few little tweaks, they could have made this their own and nobody would have even noticed.
Oh yeah, I didn't know until he started singing.
Oh yeah, I would never in a million years guess this was Help until they bring in the vocals.
And but here's where like Rod Evans is in his wheelhouse. He's got a really good vocal performance here.
I'm not noticing it now till I have this headphones on, but man, it's really hard pan. Like his vocals are hard pan to the left, which is fitting since it's a Beatles cover. Yeah, and he's got the right energy for this song, and at least the way that they're doing it. It almost makes you wonder, like, should it really kick in and just start kicking ass after this? But it still kind of just meanders around.
Well, he definitely sounds like he's into it. You know, he's got a lot of emotion behind it. And I like Ritchie's guitar tone too, really clean.
I think from what I've read, this was kind of Rod Evans' baby. Like this was his his idea and his arrangement and all that. So it's like it kicks in a little bit here, but almost makes you wonder, like, this could maybe build up to something really, really big.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. Like Nick Simper's like plucking bass.
Yep. He's definitely, yeah, I'm definitely hearing his style before, more than I have before. I never really, like we've talked about, gave much consideration to this era of Deep Purple, but I'm starting to see and appreciate the style of Nick Simper and Rod Evans and what they brought.
Yeah, I think this is the most I've ever talked about him, so so am I. For sure.
So yeah, so that gives you an idea.
Well, oh, I was gonna say, do you still have it queued up?
Yeah.
I was gonna say to hang on, let it go through the solo.
This is another interesting idea, this back and forth vocal. Which, again, is so far removed. They could have, it would have been interesting to see what they did if they turned this into something else, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm so stuck on that, but I just feel like, here we go, you know, like, why are you giving Lennon McCartney any credits on this?
Well, because you think about it, that's what these guys were. They were arrangers too.
Mm-hmm.
They arranged songs. They didn't just write.
Right. Yeah. Some nice early Ritchie soloing there.
But see, that's the thing I don't get. I don't get this solo. It's like it just when I heard it, I was just like, it sounds like he's torturing his guitar.
Yeah, it's a little, yeah, it's definitely not up to his normal standard, but you know, they probably recorded this all live simultaneously with no overdubs and just like, well, that wasn't my best effort, but what are we gonna do? We got to be out of the studio in 2 days.
Yeah, it was because when I heard it, when I was listening to it this afternoon, and I heard that, I was like, wow, that is like the most inappropriate solo for this song. It was like he was just doing all these like way out there bends. It sounded out of tune, and I'm like, what the hell was he thinking?
Yeah.
It's like that didn't fit in at all. Like he could have like they could have like when it picked up with John Lord like going into that whole keyboard thing, they could have like really went heavy, or they could have just pulled back, and it sounded like they pulled back and Blackmore's just like, nope. And he's just like, I'm just gonna like see how far I can bend these notes, and I don't give a shit if it's in tune. And
Yeah.
but like you said, he probably did like one take, and they're just like, cut, print it, you know. He's like, oh well, I guess I'm screwed.
Yeah. Well, at that point, the point of his guitar solo, they're already like 4.5 minutes into the song, so he's just like, well, what am I gonna do? We're not gonna do that whole thing again. Like, I don't even know what they did for overdubs on this album, if any.
But yeah, I mean, you have a good point. This is maybe he didn't have a lot of time to work out the solo, or maybe he was just trying to go all Ritchie on it and just be like, yeah, I'm gonna do something crazy and different. But that for me, that was like, I'd never really listened to it before, but that's probably got to be my like top like worst Blackmore solo is gonna be right there. I did not like that at all. It did not fit in. For whatever.
Yeah.
I don't dislike a lot of things that he does.
No,
So.
I mean, generally he can pick up the guitar and just anything he touches just has such feeling to it. But yeah, that was, yeah, what are you going to do?
Yeah, but I just like, I don't want to like harp on it, but it's just like, holy cow. Like, I mean, he was like in Denmark, he was like rubbing the guitar against his ass in that 72 video, and that sounded awesome. And
Or doing that thing where he's constantly bringing his fingers up, like on the, like he's playing like this way instead of like
yeah,
he's playing like this.
yeah.
And yeah, even that sounded good.
Or he's like, slamming it up against the amps and everything.
On the side of the amp, yeah. Just
yeah, so you got to think like, what happened, man?
You had all your fingers involved. What happened? So the next song is Love Help Me, which was written by Blackmore and Evans. And again, it seems to start like all these songs start like with like a weird like oops. Starts with like a weird like synthy sort of intro. Pretty good, very kind of Hendrix vibe from Ritchie's guitar in this one.
I like this.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it's really melodic.
And I feel like it's the right length too, being like 4 minutes or so. Very 60s sounding too, you know. Some of this stuff sounds a little more timeless, like Mandrake Root sounds a little more timeless, but this one sounds rooted.
Yeah. And again, like the only thing that's really out of place in a song like this, I think, is Ritchie's guitar. And I don't think it's because it was not in this case because it was bad, but I think it's just because he's such like a far out there player, like a classical sounding player and everything, that it doesn't fit in with a pop song like this.
Yeah.
I mean, the solos, not his rhythm.
It's got that chugging sort of almost.
Yeah, I really like that.
Early metal. Like, yeah, he goes into that like standard Ritchie like minor blues scale.
Yeah.
Sort of soloing, and it's a little weird on this song. Yeah.
Yeah, it does sound a little odd on this song. I feel like he could have pulled back or done something else.
It sounds great. I think it's just the shifting between Rod Evans' vocals going into that kind of solo. And like we compared Rod Evans to Elvis last week.
That's
and
right.
I think it's kind of the same thing. Like having that kind of solo on an Elvis song, like what would you do if like, you know, a little less conversation, a little more action goes into that's like the juxtaposition is kind of odd.
Well, yeah, exactly. It was just like if now it's funny. It's like you're listening to Tom Jones, and then all of a sudden Yngwie Malmsteen walks in and starts blowing the speakers out or something. You know, it's like, what the hell?
It is. Yeah. He keeps going to that same phrase.
It's a little extra. Like it doesn't fit in. And I feel like maybe somebody didn't rein him back and be like, I don't know about that part there.
Well, you figure they've been a band at this point for 2.5, 3 months. Like if they had any amount of time to work these songs out better, I'm sure they would have, I mean, they were just figuring it out. I mean,
yeah,
God, I can't even imagine I don't even think they probably thought of it as being stressful at the time, but like of trying, you've got now like a decade between Deep Purple albums, or you've got, Guns N' Roses taking whatever 15 years to record an album, like, and then they put something out and it's pretty well polished and thought out, but it's just not the time that they were in. The record label's like, okay, boys, you toured, you did 3 shows in Denmark. We got to get an album out there and get some sales.
Yeah.
Go into the studio, make it happen. You got 72 hours. Don't sleep. Here's some uppers,
And I mean, that's probably why by the time they got to the third album, and then I feel it was a lot better. But then you can't really talk about the fourth album. In rock, really, because at that point you had different songwriters involved, so that completely changed the dynamic, which is because I was starting to think, like earlier, I'm just like, God, how did they go from like this style of music just like a few years to like what they did in rock and Machine Head? Like how's that even possible? Like how do you get from this to that in like just a couple of years? I mean, even with different songwriters, even with Ian and Roger.
No, I have no idea. Maybe as we go through this in excruciating detail over the next few episodes, we'll figure it out. But man, yeah, it's night or day.
Yeah.
All right, so they close out the album with "Hey Joe," another cover which starts off with friggin' traffic sound effects.
Why? Who even knows why?
Hey Joe, watch out for that bus. I don't know. And again, here we have another cover, a 7.5 minute version of Hey Joe.
God.
Which is too long. You know, you got a lot of lead in here, a lot of organ. I like this little march they go into right here, you know? This is very concerto sounding.
Yeah, just very flamenco, like.
Some interesting work there in the composition. And again, here we are, like, I mean, later it'll become more evident this is Hey Joe, but you get like 4 minutes into the song and they're like, why are you giving songwriting credits to somebody else? You know, like, why is Billy Roberts getting any songwriting credits on this? Like, this is all Deep Purple.
Well, you figure, like you said before, they probably didn't have a lot of their own material, number one. And number two, and again, like, we're all guessing here, but since they didn't have a lot of songs, they probably wanted some traction or to make those sales. What better way to do it than to put on the most popular songs, tack them onto this album, like the most popular songs at the time, or songs that were proven successful with other bands covering them. And they're just like, well, and while you're at it, just throw some Deep Purple stuff at the beginning, and then we'll eventually segue into that other song. This way, everybody wins.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, okay, so you put this on for somebody. What's this? Hey, Joe. Where the hell do you get that?
So yeah, we're 2 minutes in and we haven't quite scratched the surface of Hey Joe yet. So we'll skip ahead a little bit here. So this is a pretty straightforward, traditional version of Hey Joe. You know, they're not trying to put an edge on it like they did with Help. They're not trying to put a spin on it or anything. But they keep going into these kind of little gothic interludes here.
You know, which is just like really, God, it just makes you just realize how strange they were as a band back then.
They had a lot of little fragments and little ideas of things that they wanted to do, and I think they all had different directions of where they wanted to go with things.
But I mean, I guess if you think about it, I mean, like, even I think like around this time or even before that, it's Ritchie with those bends again. Even like what was his name? The Dick Dale, King of the Surf guitar. He used a lot of like for the time very unusual scales and everything like that, and that became known as like classic surf rock for some reason.
Sure. I think this is just Ritchie wanting to channel Hendrix and pay his respects to somebody who he kind of idolized, and you know, it's weird because it bounces between like this John Lord orchestrated thing and a cover, like from minute to minute. It's like all of a sudden, it's Hey Joe. Oh wait, it's some sort of John Lord composition. But I'm sure this is something they probably refined a little bit more in their live shows. So I guess with this album, the English Vanilla Fudge, they got these criticisms, you know, about sounding like a B-52 taken off and everything, but historically people look a little more favorably upon this album. One thing I was really interested to find out was that Rick Wakeman chose this album in this was in an interview in 2013. He chose this album as his favorite British record of all time.
Interesting.
Yeah, it kind of blew my mind, like that anyone would consider this their favorite British album or any album of all time. Like, again, it's a band trying to discover things and figure things out, but Rick Wakeman said that about this album. So
I mean, and that's not to say that
listen, there's like another 30 seconds of just silence at the end here. It's like they were trying to pad it, like they got paid by the minute or something. He said this is his favorite British album of all time.
And that's not to say that there's not good musicianship there, because I mean, they're definitely, we know that they're all great musicians. And there were even like points in the album, like where we heard Simper's like chugging bass and some good poppy stuff and some great kind of like moments by everybody. And even a couple of songs like we're talking about Mandrake Root would be like a good cover, like if some contemporary band did it.
Yep.
It would be pretty heavy. But it's just not in my top albums, just because I think overall it's just because it's a lot of meandering, with the sound effects and the 2001 Space Odyssey noises and stuff, and the traffic and all that, and just the low energy, and then also that kind of late 60s like production. It sounds really creaky.
Yeah.
It's that creaky, like just like throw like this echo reverb on everything, and it seems to just really wash it out. I feel like like a live or a raw album by a different band in a different time. Like if you did that like in the 70s, the 80s, even now, that's cool. But them like kind of raw and sloppy back then just sounded raw and sloppy.
Yeah.
In not a great way. And then throwing a ton of like effects on it and everything, it didn't really do it justice. Like I'd love to hear like some demos of maybe some of these songs before they did any production on them or anything, just like a straight mic or whatever into it before any just like a live performance or a live show of it or something.
So it'd be interesting. We'll have to like see where after we listen to all these albums, or maybe even just the original until 1976, kind of ranking them and seeing where they stand. I read some article recently. It was like all the Deep Purple albums ranked. One of those, hey, let's get some clicks articles. And people, so there's always one thing you'd be like, no way, that album should be higher in the list. But yeah, I'd be interested to kind of see where this one falls. I mean, I think from everything from now to 1976, or from 68 to 76, this would probably be dead last. I don't know how it stacks up against newer things like Bananas or whatever, which are things that I haven't really listened to. But it's interesting. It's also hard, to talk taking 50-something years of albums and trying to compare them to each other because they're so different.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so that's Shades of Deep Purple. I don't know if you have anything else to kind of comment on with that one, but that's...
No, that was kind of my wrap up on that. Not my favorite because of not great production, meandering song arrangements. Rod Evans, little sluggish. Definitely kind of a product of its time. I mean, admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of like late 60s rock anyways, just because I feel it sounds really dated to its time, and that's just a preference for me. Some people might like that sound, but I just think the production on it's kind of weak. But there are some bright spots, some good songwriting. Of course, we know that the guys went on to do much better things. But taking in that to account too, into account the kind of the history that you gave on it, that they only recorded that in a few days. Who knows what went on?
Right.
In terms of like somebody, Ritchie did a shitty first take, and they're just like, well, no time for a second take, and he's like, oh, damn it,
Right. Yeah.
you know, could have happened. So, but either way, it is historically important because it is the first Deep Purple album. So,
Yep, absolutely.
what are your thoughts?
Kind of, I think you summed it up exactly how I would. You know, it's something that I think is historically important, something I'm interested to do in this forum, to dive into it and kind of analyze it and things. But it's not something I'm going to be like, I'm going to put this on in the car while I'm driving to work. You know, like it's not something I'm. It's something. It's like a difference between a great novel and a reference book. You know, it might, even the best reference book, it's a reference book. You'll use it when you need it. You'll check it out. It's got information in it. This is filled with information about what the band's going to become, but it's not a lot of memorable, not enough memorable moments for me to want to listen to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, we've got Deep Purple news. I'm always astonished every week that there's actually more news. I figure there's how much could possibly be going on. The big story, which I didn't even put in the show notes, is I don't know if you saw, but the longtime accountant for Deep Purple was arrested for embezzling like $3 million from the band or something. So,
oh boy,
yeah, not good.
not cool.
Not cool. But in other news, on April 19th, Raving with Ian Gillan and the Javelins was reissued.
Oh, is that him on the left?
That's him on the left. So this is a so this was his band, like before even episode 6, the Javelins. Now it's Ian Gillan and the Javelins because he's Ian Gillan now. Back then he was actually he went by the stage name Jess Thunder. Did you know that?
No.
I think I remember I read Child in Time like years and years ago, and I remember that from that was his original name. But he got back together with these guys and did like an album in the 90s, I think, and they reissued it now. So it's
cool.
You know, it's all covers: Roll Over Beethoven, Love Potion Number 9, Too Much Monkey Business. Like, you know, it's all covers of like 50 songs or whatever. But you know, not something that I'd rush out and check out, but interesting that they're re-releasing it. So I thought that was kind of cool. It's cool that it's cool that he's still like in touch with these guys. Like, that seems crazy. It's another little picture of them there. Ian Gillan way in the back there.
Wow.
Also in the news, David Coverdale has bought the rights to the first 2 Whitesnake albums and the first 2 like David Coverdale solo albums.
Awesome.
So I know I was really confused with this when I started to get into like Whitesnake after I really got interested in later Deep Purple.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he did 2 albums as David Coverdale. The first one was David Coverdale Whitesnake. The second one was David Coverdale Northwinds, but they weren't Whitesnake yet. And then after that, so those 2 albums, I guess, were on Purple Records and kind of segregated from Whitesnake proper, as most people probably know it. So now, I guess he didn't have the rights, but now he finally has the rights to those 2 albums. So it's kind of cool.
Well, that's great. Those are a couple of great albums too.
They really are. You know, I got them in one of those classic, like I think it was 2 albums on 1 CD sort of thing, or
I got the same thing, yeah.
Or the double CD in the same case or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed them. I want to give them another listen because I haven't listened to them in a really long time.
Yeah.
Also in the news, Glenn Hughes was on the Sound of the 70s radio show with this guy, Johnny Walker, I think is his name.
Mm-hmm.
And he does this BBC radio show, and he does an interview. I'll put the link in the show notes. The interview is only available until May 28th, and then they take it down. Probably some rights thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not a ton of interview with Glenn Hughes, but it's interesting hearing the interview parts of it. He starts off by playing, I think it's Lay Down, Stay Down,
mm-hmm.
Burn, and then he plays some Glenn Hughes stuff later. But he's some really interesting stories I hadn't heard before. He talks a little bit about the early Deep Purple, him getting started in the band. He was also really good friends with David Bowie. David Bowie used to live with Glenn Hughes, apparently.
Huh.
And Glenn Hughes tells a story about David Bowie writing Golden Years at his house when he was staying there. And Glenn Hughes was just there while he was doing it. So
wow, cool.
He talks about his 1991 heart attack and going into rehab, going to Betty Ford. And then he also talks about all this stuff about Glenn Hughes I never really knew, but he was in the studio with Stevie Wonder when he recorded Songs in the Key of Life, and some stories from that. And Stevie Wonder had said some years ago that Glenn Hughes is his favorite white singer. And Glenn Hughes just talks really emotionally about how much that meant to him, which I can only imagine, having Stevie Wonder shower high praise like that upon you, how much that must feel, like.
Yeah.
Talks a bit about that. It's an interesting, it's worth checking out the interview if you get a chance, although I guess I might have ruined all the high part. So check it out. I'd never listened to that radio show before. It was pretty interesting. There's some songs interspersed. I was going to try a new little segment this week called This Week in Purple History. So this episode will air. This episode will be released May 13th. So the week of May 13th in Deep Purple history, May 13th, 1948, Colin Towns was born, who is the keyboardist for the Ian Gillan band in the last two albums. May 13th, 1968 is the date that they completed recording the album that we just listened to. We talked about they recorded from the 11th to the 13th. So 72 hours later, they wrapped up their recording. In May of 1970, Quartermass, which 3 for 3 now, mentioning Quartermass on an episode. I don't know how long we can keep that up. They released their debut album in May of 1970. And then in sadder news, May 16th, 2010, Ronnie James Dio passed away. So a little sadder news. So I've been trying to go a little deeper on these in Twitter and Instagram, trying to post some of these little historical facts.
Mm-hmm.
Some pretty cool books that give a lot of good timelines, and try to get some of those stuff out there. And today, as we record this, is Bernie Marsden's birthday. 68 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. Bernie Marsden, of course, from Whitesnake. So with that, we've got our final segment, 3 Degrees of Deep Purple, or mystery track, whatever we want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
I got another mystery track for you, John. Are you ready?
All right.
So last week we played Nick Simper's Fandango, and you went out and got the album right after that because you liked it so much.
I did. You said this is right in my wheelhouse, and it is.
It was, yeah. So here's another one that I never listened to until just a couple of days ago when I was getting some show prep done. So let me cue this up here. I put my little album art in here so you can't tell what it is.
Oh, I like this.
I thought you would.
Oh, that's our buddy Rod Evans there. That's got to be.
Rod Evans. You are correct. It's amazing what a difference from what we just listened to of Rod Evans.
Oh my God, yeah.
It's another one that kind of kicks ass, huh?
Yeah. Oh, listen to him. Listen there. He got a little stanky there. Getting down and dirty.
So you got it right off the bat. It is Rod Evans.
Is it a solo project or?
This is a solo project, something you may have also heard of. Just like before, we had heard of Nick Simper's Fandango for years and never really checked it out. This is from Captain Beyond.
Captain Beyond, yeah, I've heard this album then.
Oh, you've heard the album?
They only had one album, right?
I think they had a few. I could be wrong, but this is the self-titled debut. They might have had just two, but I think there was more than one. So this was basically Rod Evans with all the guys from Iron Butterfly forming a band. So I had Larry Reinhardt on guitars, Lee Dorman on bass, and Bobby Caldwell on drums. So it almost goes into like some sort of proggy sort of sounds. Like this part right here. And the actual first track on this album, which I was going to do first off, is almost like reminds me of like a Ian Gillan band sort of style. A lot of little proggy interludes.
What was the first track
on this album?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Or what's the name of it? Do you have it?
I think I do.
Because I feel like if I heard it, just even the track name, I would probably know, because I have heard Captain Beyond before.
It's called Dancing Madly Backwards on a Sea of Air.
Yep. So I haven't heard it in a while, so I don't remember this song, but I could tell it's Rod Evans. But I really liked the direction that he went in.
Yeah.
Going with this band, and getting a little more like. I mean, you could still hear. He's a really interesting rock singer, because it's like he's, I don't know, he's just really interesting rock singer.
He is.
If you really listen to him, because by all accounts, you figure he shouldn't, like, you wouldn't guess that he'd be a rock singer. No,
it's like, well, what would Elvis have sounded like? We keep comparing him to Elvis, even though they're not super similar, but what would another crooner sound like if you put them in?
Like Tom Jones or Pat Boone or.
Yeah, but he makes it work, and it sounds like, I mean, this is 1972, so only what?
It's only a few years after the first Purple album.
Yeah, 4 years later, and this is the kind of stuff that he's getting into. I mean, it's really interesting stuff. I mean, I really liked I like that. So. That's yet another album where I'm like, I would, that, like, on this flip side, like, I would listen to that. I would listen to I wouldn't pop on Shades of Deep Purple, but I would put on Captain Beyond and rock out to that in the car or listen to it, anytime.
Well, yeah, because I mean, you got some good riffs, and there's some better production, and like the guitar's really crunchy, and like Rod's. They must have had time to work it out, because he's doing a little, like, he's getting a little gritty with his vocals, and but I mean, for me, like, production is another big thing too. It's I mean, I'm sure that you would agree. If that album was poorly produced, then it would be hard to listen to.
Oh yeah, definitely. So another one, but you got that one right off the bat. At least the link. I was wondering, like, if you would pick up on the Rod Evans, because it does sound like he went in a different direction, but you picked up on it right away.
Oh yeah, well, he's got, again, a really distinct voice. So.
All right. So with that, if you're interested in any of the stuff that we talked about, I do have 2 book recommendations. I got them right here. Deep Purple, A Matter of Fact by Jerry Bloom. Awesome book. And then Smoke on the Water, the Deep Purple story, kind of going through both of those books to put together some notes for the show and reading up a little bit on these early albums, because I really just don't know much about them, and I'm learning about them and trying to get the word out about them. And, I'm sure there's some diehard Deep Purple fans who might be saying, you guys got it all wrong. Those albums are great. They're misunderstood. But,
well, everybody's point is valid. Tell us why.
Yeah. Tell us why on Twitter or Instagram.
Yeah. Tell us why they're good, or I don't know. Tell us why you think it sucks too. I don't know.
Right. I would love to hear, I'm just as interested in hearing somebody write in and say what we got wrong about this album, or what they love about this album that maybe we're missing, as I am to actually hear about, like, why we're wrong about how much we love Stormbringer or Come Taste the Band, like,
sure.
I don't like when people think like there's just, like, there's one correct opinion, and that's not, Deep Purple has to fit in this box, because Deep Purple fits in no box. There's, between the the band lineup changes and all the spin-off stuff that we've talked about. It goes on endlessly through all these different styles and all these different things, and that's what makes it so great to me. I think you could give this family of bands to anybody. Somebody could pick up a piece of it that they really like and enjoy. So
true, very true. And it's all about opinion and personal taste. If anybody wants to respectfully debate why they really like this album, then that's of course their opinion. And if somebody wants to agree, then that's with what we said, that's their opinion too. But like you said before, we're not authorities or historians or anything. It's just like our opinion, and I feel like mostly our impressions of the album too. Like a lot of what I heard today, and then when we were talking about it now, was kind of just things that I was wondering when I was listening to the album, or opinions or things that I was picking up on, and maybe somebody else would pick up differently, or something else. But I also heard a lot of like nuances and things that I enjoyed, as well as things that I wasn't too crazy about. So it was really interesting. It's the most I've thought about this album, I think, ever. So
for sure.
And it was definitely a mystery to me too, because I went backwards. I discovered them after the classic version of Deep Purple. So to me, I didn't know much about these, except it was their earliest albums.
Yep.
Or this was their first album. So.
All right. So there you have it. So next week, we'll get ready to fire up the Book of Taliesin, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and
wow,
give that a listen. Yeah, right.
Do you hear me just breathe really heavy?
two more, and then we can get into the good stuff. No, it'll be good. It'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to that one and the next one too, just to take that same amount of time to think about it and
yeah,
over, because these are important historical works that need to be explored and shown to a new generation. All right. So with that, probably gonna wrap it up. If you have any comments about the show, if you want to tell us about what we got wrong about Shades of Deep Purple, or what you agree with, please give us an email, info@deeppurplepodcast.com, or send us a note on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And, next week we'll be getting into the next album and then, branching out from there. So with that, I guess we'll say so long and thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to the Deep Purple Podcast. If you like what you hear and would like more episodes in the future, please donate on Patreon to support the show. You can also give us a rating on iTunes to help new people discover the show. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for show updates. See deeppurplepodcast.com for more details. Thank you for listening.